I think it's kind of just a general consensus that that family is important. I think everybody would agree with that. And then at the same time, in some way or another, the concept of family is under attack. I'm sure I could share the statistics about the astonishing large number of marriages that end in divorce, or the number of children that are going to grow up without a father or father figure in their life. And I'll kind of give Jim Bob the liberty to share any of that information next week whenever he talks about pitfalls. But I think it's just easy enough just to look around you and realize, we don't have shows on television anymore like Leave It to Beaver. The response to that in our generation is shows like Family Guy. And so this idea or concept of family is definitely under attack. And I think it's interesting, and I just want to say that to highlight the fact that it's interesting to me that we all kind of have a concept of what family should look like or be. We see dysfunction and we notice it, and we have this idea of what a family should look like, and yet that's not what most families are. And we get this feeling that there might be something that's keeping us from having the perfect family. If you look at that view, the Bible becomes this surprising read of dysfunctional families, from cover to cover. The first family suffered from a husband that was a terrible leader and a wife that was manipulative, and then the sibling that killed his brother. The first family in the tribe of Israel, they took their brother and threw him in a well and then sold him into slavery. Keep that in mind when you feel like your family's mistreating you. We even have King David, who is described as a man after God's own heart, committing adultery and then murder to hide it. And I'm not even going to talk about his kids. His kids make up a good part of the R-rated portion of the Old Testament. And it's not just the Old Testament. We move into the New Testament. Even Jesus' parents leave him behind in Jerusalem for days before they realize that he's not there with the family. We also have a story in the New Testament of a husband and wife who conspire together in a lie to gain money. So I say dysfunctional families, and I think that's a label that we put on it to make it sound not as bad as it really is. Right? My family's dysfunctional. We have our problems. But what it really boils down to is, with that first family, sin entered the world. We're all just filthy sinners, and that messes up our life. Even knowing the right thing to do, we still end up not doing that thing. And of course, that bleeds into our family. God reaches down, He gives us something beautiful, and all we can do is break it, mess it up. So, I want to use this fact and a specific story of one dysfunctional family to kind of illustrate the purpose, God's purpose for what we call the family unit. We did a series in 2013 on the story of Ruth. It was a really good series, slowly becoming one of my favorite stories in the Bible, the more I look back at it. And if you would like to learn more about Ruth, that all the sermons in that series are on our Vimeo channel. You can go back and check them out. Because I'll just be kind of doing a highlight of the story today. But the story of Ruth starts in the book of Ruth, and that's where we're going to start today. Ruth 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So the story of Ruth takes a hard turn right off the bat. From the very, very beginning. We're only 5 verses in. And we already see that things are beginning to fall apart. To give you a little bit of history, the Moabites were kind of the sworn enemies of the Israelites. We're not going to go into reasons why. But Naomi's husband picks up his family and moves them because of a famine. He's afraid during the famine something might happen to his kids, so he takes it upon himself to save his family, and in doing so, it kind of ruins his family. Not to say that wouldn't have happened if they had stayed, but they went to Moab and all the men died. We'll continue in verse 6. Then she arose with her daughter-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughter-in-laws, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt kindly with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands?" And she says that because in Jewish tradition, if you were married to someone and they died, you would marry the next brother in line to kind of continue the family line. "Turn back, my daughters, go on your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter for me, for your sake, that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And Naomi said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." So the story leaves us with these 2 widows, childless, and the worst part is their in-laws. I think this is by far the weirdest or most abnormal family situation that you can get. And we're going to take a look at and see what God is trying to teach us with this family, these 2 childless widows. And for time's sake, I've picked out just 3 points I'd like to make. So I'm going to do the 3 P's of our purpose, which purpose is one of the P's of our family. So follow along, just three P's of purpose. Now, I don't think these are exhaustive. But again, I think you could just sit up here all day and talk about the purpose of the family. So we're going to just try to limit it to 3. I think they capture a lot of what we have to say. I think the first one is the family is there to provide support. Kind of growing up, I heard this story of Ruth a lot and didn't kind of recognize it until just recently that Naomi is trying to talk these 2 girls into going back to their people. They've only lived with their people, right? They live with Naomi and her husband and their 2 husbands, but in the land of their people. So they've only known their people. She's even sending them back to their gods, because Naomi believes that the hand of the Lord has turned against her. And I think it's interesting, the response that Ruth gives Naomi is Ruth claiming that she wants to be a part of Naomi's family and go where Naomi goes, and even die where Naomi dies. But she wants Naomi's God to be her God. This God that Naomi just claimed has turned his hand against her. Orpah had the normal response in that situation. Okay, goodbye, good luck, nice knowing you, right, when you get a chance. Some terrible tragedies happen, and she has the opportunity to just kind of go back to her family and start over. That's how it would have worked. She would have become a daughter in her father's house and would have looked to remarry. We can only assume that something was different about Ruth. And I think it was through her experiences with Naomi and Ruth's husband. There was something about these Israelites that was a little bit different. There was something about the God that they worshiped that was a little bit different. And even though Naomi had forgotten that, Ruth hadn't. And so Ruth kind of didn't confront her, didn't say, Naomi, you're sounding really mopey. I know that it's a tough situation, but God's against you. But she supported Naomi by not only claiming her family, but also claiming her God. This God that Naomi feels like has cursed her. And I think in a way, Ruth's saying, well, don't you remember? Don't you remember everything that he's done? But we look at the beginning of all of this, at the first family, and we see that we were meant to live in community, right? We start off with just Adam, and Adam was lonely. And so it says, from Adam, God took a rib and created Eve. And he created Eve to be Adam's helpmeet, his support. So this very first family was created with the intention of support. And it's not just support between spouses. I mean, we're going to end up with kids. God says, be fruitful and multiply. And then Jesus even addresses, kids have a responsibility to their parents. Jim Bob mentioned it last week, that fifth commandment about obeying your parents. First commandment with a promise. Jesus really harped the Pharisees because they had created a loophole where you could make donations to the church and get out of taking care of your family. And Jesus said, no, that's not right. You have a responsibility to your relatives. Because in that time especially, we've kind of moved away from it, in our Western culture. But at that time, family was it, especially for the Israelites. Can you imagine as a nation, they were related to everyone. There were people who came in and joined the nation, proselytized, but for the most part, they were all cousins. It started with the 12 brothers. So they were all related. It was their identity. They had their clans. It's how they related with each other. It was the building block of their society. And we've kind of moved away from that a little bit, but we still kind of hold on to that. We relate with our family different than we relate with other people. Rudyard Kipling wrote a poem, and in the poem, he wrote, all of the people like us are we, and everyone else is they. I think that's a pretty good way of putting it. Family shares things like dreams and hopes and possessions, memories, laughs, tears. The family clan is held together with blood and love and kind of a respect. At least that's the way it was intended. The family is a shelter from the storm, a friendly port when the waves of life become too wild. Nobody is ever alone if they have family. So not only is the family this essential building block of our society, or it should be, another purpose of the family is to produce offspring. I think Naomi and Ruth's biggest dysfunction is that they become widows without any children, which was kind of like a double whammy in their culture. They had no men in their life to provide. And we see in the story they're left to glean from the edges of the field. They kind of have to take the food that's left over after everything else is picked. But then Naomi remembers something. They do have a relative. And if you follow along with the story, there's this clause in the Jewish custom where if you don't have a sibling to marry, you marry the nearest relative. So this old man Boaz becomes Ruth's husband, and they have a child together. And that child ends up being the grandfather of King David. So God is, even in this dysfunction, starting to restore the family, starting to bless Naomi and Ruth. The Bible talks about children being a blessing. I think Jim Bob mentioned this last week. Psalms 127 reads, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies at the gate." I've got 2 little ones. I am never put to shame when I speak with my enemies at the gate. It's a little bit out of context. We're a few thousand years away from when this was written. And I remember kind of growing up in the youth group always being told about how different you would relate to God once you have kids and how much a blessing kids were. And I'd be like, well, whatever. It's difficult to even comprehend the truth of this until you've actually had a kid and the things that you put up with. And I have to be honest with you guys, I'm a little bit of a procrastinator, so I was up late last night finishing all the writing of this, and Maisie woke up, my little 2-year-old. And she normally wakes up and comes and gets in bed with me because my wife has our 2-month-old. And I get her calmed back down. Well, I thought since I was in the living room, she would just climb up in bed with my wife and go back to sleep. And from the living room, I hear her calling out for me, carrying her little stuffed pig and her bottle and her blanket, hobbling into the living room just because she wanted to sit with me, not her mom. I just kind of broke down and had a little bit of a cry and appreciate the fact that she's 2 years old and she's not going to remember it. But children are a blessing. If you don't have any kids of your own, I invite you to volunteer a Sunday or two and go help with our kids program. My wife kind of helps coordinate it all. If you stay for the pastor's lunch, you'll get to meet her and kind of hear from her and find out how to get involved. But it really is, you see God is blessing this church in that corner of the building. It is evident every time you step in there. And kids, they just bring joy. They bring a smile to your face. Ben Greer brought Wesley in this morning. And before he could get out of his mouth that Wesley had a new pair of shoes, Wesley's standing like this. Making sure that I see his brand new pair of shoes. And then he takes off running because they're fast shoes. But kids are a blessing. And if you don't have any of your own, you really should. Adopt a few in our children's program. But I do think it's also a little bit more than just reading "Be fruitful and multiply" and then just going out there and having a bunch of kids. And you can accidentally have a person. I think this production of offspring is a little bit more than that. And Jim Bob mentioned, I think, this song last week. It was a song of ascent that they would sing as they were climbing up to Jerusalem. And the song starts with it, "Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain." So producing offspring is a lot more than just having children. In the Jewish tradition, a barren woman was seen as being cursed. And so that's what the difficulty Naomi and Ruth were dealing with. They didn't have any children, even though they were married, so they were seen in their community as cursed. But again, for some people it's not difficult. For other people it is. You can't always explain it. I have friends who have gone to the doctor and wanted and still haven't had a child. And it gets back to the fact that we're dysfunctional. We're broken. We live in a fallen world. But then at the same time, I think it's for those people who have children, if they're not just straight up neglected, our society pushes us today to raise our children in a neutral environment until they become old enough to make a decision for themselves. Which I think is a bunch of malarkey. If you've ever had a kid, you know they soak up everything. It's insane how much they memorize. Like she's 2 years old. She can barely reason through getting dressed. She has multiple songs memorized, and she dances around the house and sings them. So if you're not filling up your kid with something, they're going to be filled up somewhere else. So I think part of this producing offspring is raising them up in the ways of the Lord. And I think Naomi and her husband, without realizing it, they did a pretty good job. Because Ruth made a decision to follow Naomi back to Israel. It was all laid out in the law given to Moses in the book of Deuteronomy. If you go to chapter 6, it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and you shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." What the writer's saying is, your kids are soaking this stuff up. It needs to be a constant thing in your house. Remind them of what I've done. Remind them of what I've told you. It needs to be normal conversation. That's convicting to me because I feel like I've moved away from that. It's easy to kind of get your fix on Sunday mornings. And for me, I even get extra on Sunday nights with the youth group. And then we're about to kick off our city groups, and so I'll, at least one other day a week, kind of get that fix. So don't worry about it after that. But what this writer is saying is, for the sake of your children, it needs to be something that happens all the time. But I think it's important to realize that we experience this dysfunction because of our fallen state. Because we're all sinners, we don't get this family thing right. But there's a promise. Back in that book of Deuteronomy, it's interesting, they're in the land of Moab, and God renews his covenant with the people of Israel in chapter 30. He says, "And when all these things come upon you," talking about all the curses that are going to happen if they turn their back on God. The Israelites were really good at that. Forgetting what God had done. "So, and when all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before you, and you call them to mind among all the nations where the Lord your God has driven you, and return to the Lord your God, you and your children, and obey his voice in all that I command you today, with all your heart and with all your soul, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you, and will gather you again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you." And I think that's going to bring us to the last point, I think the most important point. The purpose of our family is to point to him. That really is the point of the story of Ruth. These stories in the Old Testament of dysfunctional families that God is still working through, those are all pointing to Jesus. That he would come one day and die so the dysfunction could be forgiven. We're redeemed. That's what happened with Ruth. Boaz, old man Boaz, that married her and gave her a child, he was known as the kinsman redeemer. He took away her shame for being childless He took away that curse. And so the story becomes a story of redemption, pointing to the event of Jesus dying on the cross to be our Redeemer. Paul mentions it in his letter to the Ephesians. He talks about the husband and the wife relationship representing Christ and the church. That Boaz has redeemed us, has bought us. I'm sorry, that Jesus has redeemed us and bought us just like Boaz redeemed Ruth. We also see that the father-son relationship, or the parent-child relationship, points to God, and that we're adopted in. John writes at the beginning of his gospel, the true light, meaning Jesus, which gave light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. That's talking about his family, the Israelites, his relatives. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. We've been adopted in. I don't know if you guys have had a lot of experience with adoption. I have a cousin who has adopted 3 little kids. 2 of them are sisters. They're related. But they're very, very much different. And very different from him. He's from southern Mississippi, and you can tell it as soon as he opens his mouth. And so these little kids have come into his family, and slowly but surely, even though they're not related to him at all, physically, they look just like him, especially his son. Talks just like him, walks just like him. And as far as they're concerned, they've forgotten everything that happened before moving in with mom and dad. He actually told me a funny story. When they first moved in, the little boy moved in first and lived with them for a few years before the sisters joined. And when they did, the littlest one was like between 1 and 2. And she cried a lot. And one day she was throwing a fit. And the older sister and the little boy were playing together. And the older sister asked the little boy, "Did you cry a lot when you were a baby?" And he answered, "I cried a lot, and then I moved in with these people." That's what we're called to. We're called to adoption. It doesn't matter how dysfunctional our family is now, because we've been adopted into a new family. It doesn't matter how messed up you feel like your family is right now, because you've been adopted into a new family. And what's even better than that is some of you have your physical family in your heavenly family. And I don't think, I don't want to take away from the fact, I think, you've heard the being too heavenly minded to be any earthly good. The family serves a very much now physical purpose. And in fact, it's so important. Paul outlines in the book of Titus kind of how they measured their elders, whether or not a man could be an elder in the church, by how he took care of his family. But ultimately, all of this, all of Scripture, all of our lives, point to God. So, as a family, we still hang on to that purpose. We're growing closer together. We're looking more like our big brother. And we're given that purpose, that mission. We're here to support our family. Look around you. You didn't choose these people. You might have chosen to come to church here. But you didn't choose the people that are sitting in this congregation. That's the cool thing about family. You don't get to choose. You can choose your friends. A lot of times you can choose your enemies, but you can't choose your family. But we're here to support each other through life's tough times. Even when we feel like, and it happened in the Bible, so it's got to happen now. Support each other even when we feel like God's turned his back on us. When God's cursed us. That's what we're here for. That's what the purpose of the family is. We're also here to produce offspring, just like an actual family. Some of you are producing spiritual offspring by producing physical offspring. I'm a member of that club. But we're also purposed to draw in other dysfunctional people into this heavenly family. So now that we have this new family, Ruth's statement to Naomi can become our statement to our Heavenly Father. No matter how bad it seems or how good it seems, no matter what kind of hand you were dealt, no matter what kind of family you have, you can say, I cannot leave you or return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and you will be my God. Welcome to the family. Let's pray.